The galactic map had always been a mystery to many, stretching across billions of stars, countless galaxies, and yet there was something peculiar about it. The map was detailed, showing the known territories, trade routes, and the sprawling reach of different spacefaring civilizations. But at the farthest edge of the known universe, there was an abrupt cutoff. Beyond the boundary of human space, there was nothing. No planets, no stars, no signs of life, just an empty void. This strange gap had perplexed explorers, scientists, and historians for centuries. Why did the map stop there? What lay beyond that boundary? For most of human history, no one had dared to venture past the edge of human space. The idea of exploring beyond had been dismissed as impractical or unnecessary. After all, humanity had their own territory to protect, and there was no pressing need to know what lay beyond. But curiosity had always been a part of human nature. As technology advanced, so did the desire to explore the unknown. Yet every attempt to probe beyond the boundary met with failure. Space agencies had sent probes, drones, and even manned missions, but none of them returned with answers. The probes would simply disappear, vanishing without a trace, sending only distorted data back before they went silent. It was as though some invisible force was pushing explorers away. But no one could explain what that force was. Was it something natural, a quirk of space, or was it something else entirely? The mystery grew with every failed mission. For years, this anomaly was written off as just another unexplainable phenomenon in the vastness of space. But one day, everything changed. A new probe was launched, an advanced model with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever sent into space. It was equipped with sensors that could detect things previous probes couldn't. This probe was different. It was designed to penetrate the unknown zone and make it through. But no one, not even the most seasoned experts, could have prepared for what it would find. As the probe approached the boundary of human space, there was a strange shift in its sensors. For the first time, the instruments detected something, a pattern, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was as if something was deliberately hiding just beyond the reach of human technology. The scientists back on Earth were stunned. They had never expected to find anything, let alone something that was deliberately concealed. The more they analyzed the data, the clearer it became. There was something beyond the boundary, something important, and they had just scratched the surface. The probe pushed farther, crossing into the unknown space, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. The signals it was sending back to Earth began to change. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker in the data. But then, the feed became clearer. The probe had detected an enormous ancient structure, floating silently in the vacuum of space. It was unlike anything humans had ever seen before. The structure was massive, and yet it seemed abandoned. No signs of life, no movement, just an eerie, silent presence in the vast emptiness. The probe's camera systems zoomed in on the structure, revealing its intricate design. It was covered in strange markings and symbols, none of which matched any known language or system. It was as if the structure had been there for thousands, maybe even millions of years, untouched by time. As the probe continued its slow approach, a faint signal began to pulse from the structure. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A signal, weak but persistent. The team of scientists on Earth were at a loss for words. No one had expected this. What was this thing? And why had it been hidden beyond the reach of humanity for so long? The excitement quickly turned to apprehension as the probe drew closer. The signal from the structure grew stronger, more coherent. It was almost as if it were trying to communicate, but the message was indecipherable. The team tried everything they could to understand the signal, running every possible decryption algorithm, but nothing worked. The closer the probe got, the more the signal seemed to affect its systems. First, it was small glitches, strange interference. Then it began to completely disrupt the probe's communication system. Something was interfering with the probe's ability to transmit information back to Earth. Then, without warning, The probe went silent. The signal cut off completely. No more data. No more communication. The probe had vanished, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of unease. The scientists scrambled, trying to make sense of what had happened, but it was impossible to know for sure. Did the probe malfunction? Or had something on the other side of the boundary caused it to stop transmitting? A sense of dread began to spread across the team. They had no answers, just more questions. And with the disappearance of the probe, they were left with even fewer clues. It was as if the universe itself was hiding something, something that humanity wasn't supposed to see or understand. But one thing was certain: the boundary of human space was not just an empty void. There was something out there, something ancient and powerful, waiting beyond the reach of human exploration. The data from the probe was analyzed over and over again, but no one could come to a concrete conclusion. Some speculated that it was a naturally occurring phenomenon, perhaps a region of space where nothing could survive. Others suggested that the structure was some kind of alien artifact left behind by a long-dead civilization. But the strangest theory of all was that the boundary was a warning that humanity was not ready to cross, and that something terrible lay beyond. Theories began to spread, fueling even more questions. Was humanity truly ready to explore beyond the boundary? Or were they unknowingly venturing into a territory that was far beyond their understanding? The more the scientists tried to make sense of the mystery, the more it seemed like there were no answers. They were staring at the edge of something much bigger, much more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The boundaries of human space were not just the limits of their knowledge. They were the limits of their safety. In the weeks that followed, more and more reports came in from space agencies across the world. Similar patterns were detected in other parts of the galaxy, strange disturbances that seemed to occur only when explorers neared the edge of human space. It wasn't just one anomaly. It was happening everywhere. The boundaries of human space were shifting, and every time humanity tried to push forward, something stopped them. No one could understand why. Was it a natural phenomenon? A cosmic event? Or was it something more sinister? Whatever it was clear that humanity had just touched the surface of a far greater mystery. The boundary was not just a limit to human exploration. It was something far more significant. And the question now was, why was it there? And what would happen if humanity dared to cross it? As the tension grew, one thing became clear. The answers were out there, waiting just beyond the edge of human space. But finding them would require more than just technology and curiosity. It would take courage, determination, and perhaps even a willingness to face something humanity wasn't prepared for. And as the scientists and explorers prepared for the next step in their journey, they all had the same question: what lay beyond the boundary? And would they be ready when they finally found out? The answer, it seemed, was waiting in the silence beyond the stars. And it was a secret that might just change everything humanity knew about their place in the galaxy. The world was still in shock after the disappearance of the probe. The data it had sent back, though fragmented and incomplete, hinted at something that had never been imagined: an ancient, unknown structure at the edge of human space. But with no new transmissions, no new leads, the mystery only deepened. The scientific community was buzzing with theories, but they all agreed on one thing: the boundary of human space was not a natural phenomenon. Something had intentionally hidden that part of the galaxy, something far more intelligent and ancient than humanity could comprehend. A few months after the probe's disappearance, a new team of explorers was assembled. This team was different. They were not just scientists. They were also experts in advanced technologies, cryptography, and military tactics. The loss of the probe had shaken the world, but it had also ignited a fire in the hearts of the most daring humans. They were ready to go further, to discover what lay beyond the boundary, no matter the risks. They knew they had to be cautious. Whatever had stopped the probe wasn't something they could easily overcome, but their curiosity outweighed their fear. The mission was launched in secrecy, and the team's objective was simple: find out what had happened to the probe and learn what the ancient structure was. But the boundary of human space wasn't just a border on a map. It was a place where reality itself seemed to shift. The closer they got to the edge, the more unusual things became. The signals from the spacecraft started to warp, the instruments began to malfunction, and the crew began to feel a strange sensation, something that couldn't be explained. It was like the air itself was thick with anticipation, as if something was watching them. For days, they moved toward the unknown zone, crossing the very same boundary that the earlier probe had passed through. Their sensors were designed to be much more sophisticated, capable of detecting even the slightest anomaly. As they entered the region where the probe had last transmitted, something unexpected happened. For the first time, the ship's scanners picked up an incredible energy signature, a massive field that was pulsing with power. The energy seemed to emanate from the same location the probe had discovered, but the intensity was much greater now. It was as if the structure was waking up. The team was stunned. They had known there was something out there, but the scale of what they were detecting was beyond what they had imagined. The structure that the probe had found was not just a forgotten relic. It was alive, and it was reacting to their presence. This discovery changed everything. There was no turning back now. The question was no longer what was out there, but who had built it and why it was so carefully hidden. As the ship approached the structure, they could see it more clearly. It was enormous, a massive ring-shaped object floating in the void, with countless smaller structures attached to it, as though it were some kind of vast station or hub. The surface was covered in strange, pulsating lights and intricate patterns that glowed in a way that suggested a purpose, perhaps even a form of communication. It was silent, still, and appeared to be waiting. But what for? The ship's crew began to debate what they should do next. Some suggested landing on the structure to explore it up close, while others argued they should proceed with extreme caution. They didn't know what they were dealing with. Was it abandoned, or was there something still alive on the station, watching them? The team decided to take a cautious approach, sending out probes to gather more data. However, as soon as the probes entered the vicinity of the structure, they were immediately pulled into a massive energy field. The probes sent out an emergency signal, but it was quickly lost. It was as though they had been sucked into a black hole. There was no sign of them afterward. No data. No trace. A sense of dread began to spread among the crew. They had been so close to understanding the structure, but now, it seemed as though it was deliberately keeping them at bay. Whatever this object was, it was far more advanced than anything humanity had encountered before. And now, it seemed to be protecting itself. This was no ordinary alien artifact. It was something more, something with a purpose. The crew started to feel as if they were being watched. Every movement, every decision, seemed to be calculated by some unseen force. Despite the growing fear, the mission commander, Captain Alina Harris, insisted that they continue. "We didn't come this far just to turn back now," she said. "We need answers. Whatever this is, it's important, and we're going to find out what it wants." The crew hesitated, but they trusted her leadership. With renewed determination, they began to prepare for the next phase of the mission. They would approach the structure once again, but this time they would be more prepared. They had to understand the nature of the energy field, and they needed to figure out how to communicate with whatever had built this enormous, mysterious object. Captain Harris ordered that the ship move slowly and carefully, avoiding any more unexpected interference. They began a more detailed scan of the structure. This time, they were able to identify something strange, a faint encrypted signal emanating from the center of the ring. It was a pattern, an unmistakable code, but it wasn't in any known language. The crew's cryptographers immediately began working on deciphering the message, knowing that this could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the structure. As they worked, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems began to flicker, and strange readings appeared on the monitors. The encrypted signal began to change, evolving into something that looked like a message. The cryptographers worked tirelessly, But the code was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The more they decoded, the more they realized that the message was warning them. It wasn't just a message of knowledge. It was a warning of impending danger. The signal, though fragmented, seemed to suggest that the structure was a containment device, holding something back. And what it was holding back, it seemed to be warning the crew was coming awake. The sense of urgency among the crew intensified. They were no longer exploring a forgotten relic. They were dealing with a live, active installation, and whatever it was containing, it wasn't something they wanted to release. The encrypted message seemed to grow more frantic, more desperate, as though the being or force responsible for this structure was trying to send a final warning. In the final moments of their investigation, just as the team was about to make a breakthrough with the signal, an unexpected force jolted the ship. The entire vessel shook violently, and the crew scrambled to keep control. Outside the windows, the structure began to pulse with an eerie light. The energy field around the station grew more intense, threatening to pull the ship closer. The crew, now in panic mode, rushed to disengage from the structure, but it was clear that something was changing, something beyond their control. The warning had been issued, and now it seemed they were being drawn into the very force they had come to uncover. As the ship tried to break free from the pull of the energy field, the final message from the station came through. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a command. Return. The gate is opening. You have been warned. With that, the transmission ended. The crew had no choice but to retreat. They barely escaped the pull of the energy field, and as they moved back toward the known space of humanity, they knew one thing for certain. They had come far too close to unlocking a secret that was never meant to be found. Something ancient, something powerful, had been awakened, and it was clear that humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy. Something had been waiting for them. And now, the race against time had begun. As the team returned to human space, they were left in a state of stunned silence. The mission had barely scraped the surface of something far larger and more dangerous than they had anticipated. Captain Elena Harris, usually unshaken by the many dangers of space exploration, was visibly unsettled. The messages they had received, the strange warnings, and the growing tension as they approached the massive structure all weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in the unknown reaches of space, but in humanity's place within the galaxy. It was as if they had stumbled upon something that had been hidden for a reason that humanity might not yet understand. The encrypted message from the structure still echoed in her mind. Return. The gate is opening. You have been warned. What did it mean? The gate was opening. Open to what? And why had they been warned? Everything was pointing to something far beyond the knowledge of human civilization. This wasn't just about ancient alien technology. This was about something much older, much more profound. And it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was active, aware, and waiting. It had been waiting for humanity to cross that boundary, for someone to open the gate. The days that followed were filled with confusion and debate. The mission data was analyzed repeatedly, but the answers remained elusive. The cryptographers and scientists worked tirelessly, trying to decipher the cryptic warning. The more they examined the encrypted message, the more it became clear that the structure they had encountered was no ordinary piece of alien architecture. It was a containment system, a device built to hold something back, something powerful and dangerous. But what? Captain Harris held a meeting with the senior members of the mission team. "We've barely scratched the surface of what we encountered out there," she began. "What we found is beyond anything we've seen in the galaxy. That structure is not just a piece of technology. It's a key to something much bigger. And whatever is inside that structure, whatever it's keeping contained, is waking up." The room was silent. The gravity of her words settled in. The implications were terrifying. If this was true, then humanity was dealing with something far beyond their understanding. Something older, more powerful, and possibly hostile. It was no longer a question of curiosity or discovery. This was a matter of survival. The team was split. Some argued that humanity should leave this mystery alone. They had already come too close, and the warning from the structure could not be ignored. Others, however, believed they needed to continue the investigation. After all, they had barely uncovered anything. They had to know what lay inside the structure and why it had been hidden for so long. What if it was something that could change the course of humanity's future? What if there was a way to use this knowledge for the betterment of mankind? The temptation to know more was strong, but the warnings from the structure kept replaying in Harris's mind. The gate is opening. What gate? What was waiting to emerge? Determined to uncover the truth, Captain Harris authorized a second mission, a mission that would take a different approach. This time, they wouldn't just send a small crew to investigate the structure. They would gather all the necessary resources, build a team of experts in various fields, and send an expedition large enough to understand what they were dealing with. They would need a plan, a strategy to not just investigate, but to defend themselves if necessary, because something told them that whatever they were about to discover was not going to be easy. The second mission took months to prepare. They built a larger ship, equipped with advanced technologies and defense systems. The new crew included the brightest minds in the fields of engineering, physics, alien biology, and even military strategy. Captain Harris briefed them extensively on everything they had learned so far. They would approach the structure with caution, but they would also be ready for anything. As the mission launched, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. The unknown had a way of luring people in, making them believe that there were secrets to uncover that could bring glory or progress. But this time, there was no excitement, just an overwhelming need to understand the enormity of what they were about to face. Weeks passed as the ship approached the same boundary where they had lost the previous probe. The crew could feel the tension in the air, an unease that spread through every corner of the ship. As they entered the zone, the same energy signature that had been detected during the first mission flared up on their instruments. The massive energy field was still there, pulsating with an unnatural intensity. It felt as though the entire area had come alive, reacting to their presence. The ship's sensors went haywire, flickering in and out of control. The crew held their breath as the ship drifted closer to the object. The structure loomed before them, even more imposing in person than they had imagined. It was enormous, far larger than any ship or station humanity had ever built. The lights on its surface shimmered and glowed with an eerie intensity, casting long shadows across the ship's hull. The entire area felt suffused with a kind of tension, as if the structure itself was aware of their presence. Something had awakened. When the ship's crew tried to scan the structure, the readings were even more baffling than before. They could sense energy flowing through it, but it wasn't just power. It was a complex pattern, a structure of information they couldn't quite decode. The closer they got, the more the ship's systems seemed to resist the scan, as though the structure was blocking their efforts, keeping them from understanding it fully. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be understood. Not yet. Captain Harris gathered the crew in the main control room. "We've crossed the line," she said, her voice grave. "We're standing on the edge of something far bigger than any of us realized. But we have to go forward. We need to understand what this is and what it's keeping locked away." They prepared to dock with a massive structure. Every inch of the plan was calculated. Every move would be methodical. There was no room for error. As they made their way closer, the ship's sensors picked up something truly shocking. Faint, but unmistakable signs of life. Not just one life form, but many. The structure was not just a dormant relic, it was a living entity, or it was at least connected to one. And the life it was holding was not human. Captain Harris's heart raced. It was happening. The boundary was no longer just a wall of space. It was the boundary between humanity and an ancient force. They had crossed the threshold, and now they had no choice but to face the consequences. The gate was opening, and something was about to come through. The tension in the air was palpable as the ship made its final approach to the massive structure. The crew could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them, each person knowing that the outcome could be catastrophic or world-changing. The unknowns were endless, and the structure before them was a mystery wrapped in layers of enigma. As they docked with the alien station, the ship's hull vibrated lightly with the force of its connection. The docking bay of the station opened slowly, like the gates of an ancient fortress, revealing an airlock that led into the heart of the structure. It was clear that this wasn't an ordinary installation. It was designed for something far beyond the scope of human engineering. Every surface was smooth, metallic, and covered in intricate, glowing symbols. The air inside was stale, almost as though the station had been untouched for millennia. Captain Harris led the team through the airlock, her footsteps echoing through the vast, silent corridors. The station was cold and empty, but there was an undeniable sense that something had been here, something had lived here. The crew's footsteps seemed to disturb the silence, as if the structure had been waiting for them to arrive. The deeper they went into the station, the more they felt like they were walking into the past, into a place long abandoned. But every piece of technology they encountered seemed as if it could awaken at any moment. At the heart of the station was a central chamber, an enormous room filled with strange, floating platforms that hovered just above the ground. The room seemed to hum with a low-frequency sound, a vibration that went through the air, through the very walls of the structure. The crew stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. In the center of the room was a massive, shimmering portal, a gate, just like the one the message had warned them about. It stood tall, radiating an eerie, pulsating energy that filled the room with a strange light. The team was drawn to the portal, compelled by the same curiosity and dread that had driven them this far. As they approached, the air grew thick, and the ship's systems began to glitch again. The energy around the portal was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't just power. It was alive, sentient in a way that defied all logic. It felt like it was watching them, evaluating them, waiting for something. One of the engineers, Dr. Jason Lyle, cautiously reached out toward the portal. His hand trembled as he approached the shimmering surface. The moment his fingers brushed against the energy field, the entire room seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and the hum turned into a deep, resonating vibration that filled the air. The portal flared to life, sending out waves of energy that crackled in the air. It was no longer just a gate. It was a living entity, opening to something beyond. The team stepped back in shock as the energy from the portal reached out like a hand, grabbing hold of the air around them. The temperature dropped sharply, and the station's systems went haywire. Lights flickered and died, while the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The crew watched in horror as the very fabric of reality around the portal seemed to warp and shift, as if the laws of space and time were being undone. Captain Harris barked orders to the crew, trying to maintain control. "Get to the ship. Now," she shouted, but it was already too late. The portal had opened wide, and the air around them was filled with a deafening roar. The hum of the station grew louder, and something was emerging from the other side. For a brief moment, the crew saw a silhouette, a figure, massive and dark, emerging through the portal. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before, a being of unimaginable size and power, its form obscured by the distortion around it. But the aura of its presence was unmistakable. It was ancient, it was alive, and it was angry. The ground beneath the crew's feet shook violently as the being fully emerged from the portal. The figure, standing over 10 meters tall, was encased in a dark, metallic exoskeleton, its eyes glowing a fierce red. It moved with a terrifying grace, each step sending shockwaves through the station. The crew stumbled backward, frozen in fear, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The portal had opened, and whatever had been trapped on the other side was now free. This can't be real," Dr. Lyle whispered, his voice trembling as he backed away slowly. "What is that thing?" "It's not just a thing," Captain Harris replied, her voice grim. "It's the reason this station exists. It's what's been held back for millennia. The being's glowing red eyes turned toward them, and for a moment, it seemed to study them, sizing them up. The crew could feel the immense power radiating from the creature, and the air around them seemed to thicken with a sense of impending doom. Whatever it was, it had been waiting for the portal to open. It had been trapped for eons, contained by the very structure they had come to investigate. Then, to their horror, the being let out a deep, guttural roar that reverberated through the walls of the station. The sound was almost otherworldly, like the roar of a predator from the depths of the cosmos. It was a call, a signal, a demand. And as it roared, the air in the chamber seemed to crackle with energy. The crew could feel the force of the creature's presence, the overwhelming power that came with it. "Move! Get back to the ship," Captain Harris shouted, her voice hoarse with urgency. But the being wasn't going to let them leave so easily. As they turned to run, the ground beneath their feet trembled again. The creature lifted its hand, and the energy in the room surged. A blast of force shot out from its outstretched palm, slamming into the crew, sending them flying backward. The force of the impact left them disoriented, their ears ringing. But Captain Harris, still conscious, managed to grab hold of a rail and pull herself up. Her heart raced as she looked around. "Get up. We need to move now," she screamed, urging her crew to recover. The creature's glowing red eyes flickered, and for a moment, it seemed as if it was considering them. But then, it took a step forward, its massive foot shaking the very foundations of the station. It was clear now. This being wasn't here to communicate. It wasn't interested in peaceful interaction. It was here for something. And the crew, humanity, had just gotten in its way. The team scrambled to regain control of the situation. The portal was still open, still pulsing with energy, and the creature continued to move closer. They had no time to waste. The only thing they could do now was escape, before they were caught in the creature's grasp. With the beam gaining on them, Captain Harris led the team toward the docking bay. The station's systems were beginning to fail, and the air around them seemed to hum with a building intensity. The walls were shifting, the light flickering in and out. The station was reacting to the presence of the creature, and it wasn't happy about it. As they reached the docking bay, the crew scrambled aboard their ship, their hearts racing. Captain Harris slammed her hand onto the controls, issuing orders to launch. The engines roared to life, and the ship's thrusters flared as they pulled away from the station. But as they broke free, they could see the creature, standing at the edge of the station, watching them with those glowing red eyes. And for the first time since they had embarked on this mission, the crew realized the truth. They hadn't just opened a gate to another part of the universe. They had unlocked something far more terrifying. The return of an ancient force, something that had been waiting, something that had been contained for a reason. The boundary of human space was no longer just a map line. It was a warning. And now, humanity had to face the consequences of crossing it. The gate had opened, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The ship's engines roared to life, and the crew barely managed to escape the grasp of the massive creature. As they fled from the alien station, their hearts pounded in their chests, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Captain Harris, though a seasoned leader, felt the immense gravity of the situation. They had not only encountered an ancient force, something that had been waiting for eons, but they had inadvertently released it back into the universe. The creature, now freed from its prison, stood on the station's edge, watching them depart with its glowing red eyes. The crew could feel its presence even from the distance, as though it was watching them through the void of space, knowing their every move. There was no escaping the fact. They had opened a Pandora's box, and what they had unleashed was not just a force of nature. It was a predator, and humanity was now its prey. As the ship sped away, the station behind them began to crumble, its once pristine structure breaking apart in a violent explosion of energy. The entire station was reacting to the creature's emergence, collapsing under the weight of whatever force had been contained within. The crew watched in stunned silence as the remnants of the station were swallowed by the blackness of space, its destruction sending shockwaves that reverberated through the ship's hull. "Captain, we need to get out of here now," Dr. Lyle, the engineer, urged, his voice strained with panic. "Whatever that thing was, it's not going to stop. We need to go back to Earth and report everything. We're not safe out here." Harris nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the vastness of space ahead. "I know. I'm not sure we're safe anywhere anymore, Jason. But right now, we need to put as much distance between us and that station as possible. We've triggered something that's bigger than any of us, and I fear we don't even know the extent of what we've just unleashed." The ship's crew was in a state of shock. They had been so close to uncovering the truth, to unveiling the mystery of the boundary of human space. But in doing so, they had unknowingly unleashed something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. For the next few days, the crew worked in silence. The urgency of their situation kept them busy with repairs, system checks, and trying to stabilize the ship's communications. The ship had taken some damage during the escape, and although they had managed to retreat, they were still not out of harm's way. They could feel the alien presence on the edge of their consciousness, like a dark shadow hanging over them, always just out of sight. But despite the fear, Captain Harris couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they hadn't seen the worst of it yet. The creature they had encountered was no ordinary alien. It was something ancient, something powerful enough to be contained for millennia. And now it was free. But why had it been contained? What had been so dangerous about it that an entire station was built just to hold it back? And more importantly, what would it do now that it had been released? They couldn't stay in the dark about it forever. Harris knew they had to return to Earth to warn humanity. But how could they explain what they had encountered? How could they make the world understand that they had unwittingly crossed a line, one that humanity was never supposed to cross? The truth was, they didn't even fully understand it themselves.